definition as such is considered as violent or aggressive behaviour within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner. But abuse itself is quite a subjective term as well, and that can be categorised into many different things. So the main one that people are probably aware of is the physical abuse, and it could also be sexual abuse or financial abuse. So it could be having control of people's finances, not allowing them to spend their own money, stalking or cyber stalking, so particularly more of probably a modern day problem with the use of social media.
No sort of emotional, psychological focus on it at all. So hence the new law, the Serious Crimes Act in 2015 came about late December of last year. And it sort of closed the gap in the law around the psychological and emotional abuse that sort of it falls short of the physical abuse, and so now it's targeting people who are psychologically and emotionally abusive towards their partners.
Absolutely. I think when men confide in things, and this is no disrespect to men, but their friends often brush it under the carpet and laugh it off, and it's not received in a serious way. And that's not just across domestic violence, it's any kind of expressing of emotion, that it's not received in that way. And I think it's not just one person's responsibility to kind of change that, it's everybody's responsibility. Men and women, we all have a responsibility to look out for one another as a society.
Is essentially because over time, people who tried to explain the Quran to their communities, people who dealt in the translation of the Quran, and so on, they brought into these particular verses a lot of their own culture. So a lot of their existing culture of male dominance and so on was brought in to their explaining of these verses. And so therefore we have to first begin by tackling this idea that Islam promotes the concept of the alpha male, or Islam promotes the idea of the man controlling the wife or owning the wife or being above her and so on. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is actually how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, addressed this situation where somebody is married to a woman and they're not really getting along. He said, a good believer should not loathe his wife. If he dislikes one characteristic of her, there are other characteristics which will be pleasing. So here the Prophet ﷺ is basically saying that, don't let this build to a point that you actually loathe your wife, that you actually hate her. Because if you start behaving like that, you get to this point, you're always going to treat her badly, you're always going to treat her unfairly, and that's not what we want in a marriage. So he says if you dislike one thing, then there's other things that you will like. Because the verse itself was revealed when a companion slapped his wife once in her face, and she complained to the Prophet ﷺ that this has happened. And then the verse came down that actually you can't do this in the first instance. If she did something wrong that upset you, first remind her, then avoid her when you go to bed at night, and then if you must, then you can tap them. And the Prophet ﷺ completely forbade hitting someone in the face or hitting someone that would scar them or harm them. And the final illustration of this was when the Prophet ﷺ saw Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and he had his hand raised and he was about to hit his slave. And you can understand that the Prophet ﷺ just walked across, he's just seen Ibn Mas'ud standing there about to hit his slave, and he shouts out to him, Allah has more power over you than you over him. Most imams of masajid actually do this and help people, so you should really go and speak to them. But aside from that, there's a dear sister of ours who's currently not well, so we hope that she gets well soon. But she set up an organisation called Ihsas, which literally means taking care of, or nurturing and looking after. And she helps with domestic violence, more specifically to do with women. And she has a counselling background, so she's really able to get in there and help both sides. You have other scholars, for example, Disri Masjid have a service where for family-related issues. There's the Bukhari Centre, Sheikh Ahlan al-Jaburi, he often helps out. Sheikh Awdallah Yusuf of the Open School, he also helps with
so there are places where people can go locally in Manchester, is it? So that's really beneficial to know.
Okay, so basically the Duluth model is just an indication of types of domestic violence, because a lot of people are unsure about what is actually classed as domestic violence. So that can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be about control, it can be physical violence, so
abuse. And I myself wasn't aware that it was so sort of holistic in that sense, where it does cover, coercive behavior, it does cover, financial abuse as well, and all these psychological sort of tactics as well, that this sort of persistent behavior of wearing somebody down. And I can imagine there's many victims that are out there that are suffering in silence, because they limit domestic abuse to just the aspect of violence itself, and they don't go beyond the realm of violence, so they don't think that they're actual victims themselves. I mean, how can we go and educate people more about this actually, because like as I said myself, I was quite shocked at the definition that it does cover all of this. So therefore there's help available out there for these people that are suffering in silence.